Good evening and happy Monday to everybody. Welcome to greetings from Valley City, North Dakota. The priests of our diocese have gathered here at our retreat house in order to participate in our continuing education days. We're getting some very fascinating talks with a professor of history from the University of Mary, an institution you might want to keep your eye on. They're doing some pretty cool stuff there. Uh, Talking about how to assess the Enlightenment as Catholics. It's been pretty interesting discussions and fruitful conversations around that, which is partially inspired what I've been planning on talking about tonight. But I'm sure you're all thinking about the recent passing of our Holy Father Pope Francis, and so I thought we'd start off by offering up a prayer for him. So, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. May he rest in peace, amen. May his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace, amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Now, the main topic of our discussions at our continuing education days doesn't revolve around this, but it kind of came up along the way there. What is this idea of culture? It was just kind of a throwaway line that was included in some of the texts that we were given to read, but it really kind of caught me. This idea of what a culture is something that is held in between people, whereby they can make sense of the world, that they can come up with a common narrative, common story, common sense making there. In particular, connection between ideas, connection between the people who have these ideas, connection between the work that these people do, and the connection with the last fourth thing that I can't remember at this moment. It brings everything together, right? Your culture is the one that helps you orient towards a common end, tell you what sorts of things you should be doing, what sorts of things that you should be avoiding there. I also, this is actually a bit, we're going to use a fancy term here, isomorphic with a certain faculty of the soul. There's, according to Aristotelian anthropology, there's a faculty of the soul called the common sense. And what the common sense provides for the human being is, we've got all of this sense information pouring at us all the time. We've got a multitude of colors coming at us, sounds coming from all over the place, being able to touch things and feel them, being able to smell them, sometimes being able to taste things, all of these senses bombarding us at once. What the common sense does is it kind of performs that filtering that you may have heard Dr. Peterson talk about and Dr. Vervaeke talk about. This was, of course, known to the ancients already, that all of this filtering would go on. It allows you to take something like a Fleet Farm bottled water. What we have here, as far as you're concerned, is just a bunch of light emitting from your screen. And if you don't have a properly functioning or formed intellect, you wouldn't be able to make sense of this light. But because you, I think so, in theory, have been able to participate in the world and learn about water bottles and what their properties are, how to recognize them, you can actually look at the light emitting from your screen and deduce that I'm actually holding a plastic water bottle right now. So that has a sort of a similar kind of function as does culture for a great many people. The common sense allows us to focus our attention, allows us to make sense of a large amount of data coming with us, to filter those things out, hopefully in a way that is healthy, both for the individual and for the collective, and to be able to actually navigate in the world. If you've got a deficiency in your common sense, you might end up like some of the people that Oliver Sacks wrote about in The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, which is a very interesting book that you could read. So we could look at some of the disruptions of our time. We could look at some of the chaos of our time. You could listen to, friend of the show, Mark Lefebvre, talk about how the world ended in 2014, but most people didn't notice until starting in 2016, all of these different things. And, at least part of the cause of that has got to be not sharing a common culture. You can read about the fragmentation of media. You can read about the fragmentation of American society, people feeling more isolated than they ever have before, people sometimes reaching out in strange places to find this meaning. Because meaning in life is not optional. It is not a luxury. For some, it is absolutely one of the most essential things. It's the reason that you actually get out of bed in the morning rather than just laying over and dying. So, returning to the topic that everybody is thinking about and everybody's talking about, at least in my circles, the election of the next Roman pontiff. Once the days of mourning are concluded for him, and we kind of finish up our intentional period of prayer for the repose of his soul, the cardinals will gather together, I guess, on May 7th and begin the process of electing the next Roman pontiff. And I think one of the many of his pressing, important roles that he will have to fulfill is to cultivate a common culture, to get people into a place where we can have a shared collective understanding, at least within a certain body of the church. And, that's can account for a whole lot of difference between the way you see some priests talk, the way you some lay people talk, and others, is that we know we don't have a characteristic unity, which is supposed to be that which really sets the Catholic apart, is their unity with the Roman Pontiff. And so I'm praying fervently that the Holy Spirit would send us a man who is capable of cultivating that common culture amongst the absolutely mind-boggling diverse types of Catholics all throughout the world, to have a greater peace and unity there. This may have to include saying that certain things are out and excluding certain things. And there's mechanisms for that inside the church, but that's my prayer. That's my prayer for the Pope, a Pope who can deliver us a certain amount of unity and a certain amount of shared understanding in our world today. And I don't think that would be good just for the church. I think that would be good for the entire world in which the church finds herself ministering to. So let's take a look at some of these messages here. Go ahead and hop on. We've got the link posted up there. You should be able to try that. And during the beginning of my stream, I had 2 weeks ago, telling everybody that last week wasn't happening. We got some fun stuff about time travel there. And Andrew coming in with some classic Christian theology that God is not constrained by time and space. Praise God. We'll talk about the conclave as much as you want. I guess the only thing that I have to note about the conclave right now is that there isn't a clear front runner. So we'll see how that turns out. Mark, would you give us a demonstration of how to say culture?
Culture.
Culture. Okay.
Yeah. Why does everybody not know that? It's the proper pronunciation, of course.
Is it now? Okay. Alrighty. Well, I think that's a unique expression of your culture's unique heritage there, and I celebrate the diversity because I can still understand what you're saying, and so it doesn't cause any problems.
Well,
Culture,
and I think
that's the way you say it right there. Culture.
I think that's actually the key to understanding culture, is that is what holds the diversity together. Right? Like that is the thing that it's also why people used to come to the United States. So for example, none of my father, my aunts and uncles, they don't speak French at all. My grandparents spoke French, or French Canadian, if you want to be persnickety about it, which only the French would want to be, which is why they left. Like he now he would sing the Canadian national anthem in French because he was a proud French Canadian, not ever having lived there, by the way, but still steeped in French Canadian culture in Biddeford, Maine, which had the largest French Canadian population outside of Canada, or the largest French population outside of Canada, actually, at the time. And so that's how, but he, like, my last name's pronounced Lefevre, which makes no sense because it's an Americanization of Lefebvre or Lefebvre. Either one would qualify. They're spelled the same. And that's the issue, is that parlor francases. What's that? I don't know what that is. I'm very good at butchering French. French Canadians are excellent at butchering French in just the right way. But they, to some extent, they broke with French culture, and it formed a new culture in Canada, which doesn't fit. If you've read American Nations by Colin Woodard, I don't know that he actually goes into it so much. I mean, I might be forgetting, but there's 3 cultures in Canada. Right? There's the native culture, the French culture, and the English culture. But that binds them together. And then in the United States, what binds the French Canadians that came is the American culture. Like, if you're coming for the culture, you're coming to be part of that culture, and that's the difference, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it used to be, I read an interesting article on First Things recently. It was about how to commemorate 1776, and it was all about like the national mythos that was I think really codified, especially after the Civil War. There was certainly aspects of it that were present there, but there was a certain codification and unification in the message, especially around the person of Abraham Lincoln, to whom we built a temple. Pay attention to that. That's not an accident right there. And so there used to be, like, if you'd come to the United States of America, you would learn to wave the flag. You would learn to, sing the Star Spangled Banner and really love the Constitution, love your freedoms here, because you weren't getting that in Europe, apparently. And, we had like something that we could, welcome people into. And even if it was a little bit superficial, like a lot of people never get past the superficiality in life, So that was one of the topics that we were talking about today. Is, we were reading this this letter from Pope Francis. It only came out like 5 or 6 months ago, about how to study history in a Catholic, and he was always talking about this historical sense of things. And I just have to imagine it sounds better in Italian, because that just doesn't really sound like anything in English. Historical sense, like, what does that mean? And my question for the presenter is, like, okay, do we want every truck driver and Walmart greeter to have like a really sharp sense of, the different ages and the different priorities? And he was like, well, I'm talking to a whole group of priests right now. Like, that's the people I think that really need to have this historical sense to be able to evaluate these things. But I think a lot of people oftentimes are just kind of running on the basic narrative that they're given, and they've got 8 hours, 40 hours of work a week, and a wife and kids to take care of, and they don't have time to worry about, the particularities of Roman culture as it existed at the time of Jesus.
And they may not have the capacity to do, like, this is the problem. Like, are you your brother's keeper or not? And if you are, first of all, who's your keeper? Oh, nobody talks about that. Weird. Must be a coincidence. But also, what does that fundamentally mean for, like, why would you need to be their keeper? Like, if we're all equal, or they're all equal, that would be ridiculous. Of course, it's not ridiculous. So, right, different people need to hear different things. And I think the thing that people miss, especially if you haven't read American Nations, you might get get confused, like Andrew clearly is, about whether or not America has a culture and what it is. We do, and that's the difference. And it's interesting because I grew up in Lowell, Now, Lowell is the most diverse city in the United States. It always was. For ever since I don't know, the third phase or maybe the second phase of the Industrial Revolution in the United States, right? When they got rid of the mill girls, long story. I can tell that story, but this is not the time. They had a bunch of immigrants come in, and then it was ridiculously diverse city. I think when I left Lowell, it was 43% immigrant population, as in not white immigrant, as in non-white immigrant. Like it was really, it's like,
It's kind of a wild place to try and run it then. Like how many?
But it worked, and the thing was, like, you go to, when I grew up in Lowell, like it was Lowell versus Methuen, man, and nobody liked Andover. Like, I mean, we had a very strong local culture, and you have to kind of keep in mind, it's cultivate, culture. Do you hear the pattern yet?
It almost sounds like you speak Latin when you talk like that, Mark.
I know, huh? Almost. I have been known to
It's exactly what those words mean. It like the religious worship and the way they did their harvesting, they were all the same thing.
Yep. Right. Well, in the past, we had not only the hierarchy, because in Latin is a very hierarchical language. People don't think about that. But if you step back for a second and you go, wait a minute, what's going on? I mean, that's why I joke with people like, no, we already have the best programming language. It's called Latin. Like Latin would make an awesome programming language. It really, really would make it would be very hard to learn because it's super verbose for programming language. But also, when you step back and you look, that was built into the language, right? And so we've been taking bricks out of the tower for quite some time, the Jenga tower, and it's hard to identify which bricks caused the problem, right? And part of it is this inability for us to recognize the role of cultivation in culture, right? Because without cultivation, culture degrades to cult. Oops, right? That's the root word. And then that's why I think it's important to differentiate the Anglo-Catholics from the Gnostic heretical pagan cults or sects. You can do it either way, doesn't matter, right? That is the rest of the people claiming to be Christians or claiming Christianity or something foolish that makes no sense after the Reformation. And then you get confused with things like, did the Enlightenment cause a problem? Well, obviously not in the United States, although the United States didn't take the whole Enlightenment, guys. It just really took the Scottish Enlightenment. It kind of left the rest behind. That might be a hint, right?
We spent a lot of time with the French Enlightenment today.
Right. Well, but maybe if you're confused, like Jonathan Pageau claims, a lot of the Enlightenment rah-rah people are confused. And although I have to partially disagree with him about, there's the good Enlightenment and the bad Enlightenment. We just kind of draw an arbitrary line. No. There's the good Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment, and there's the rest of the garbage that can be thrown out wholesale. Right. And it's like, what? And no, really, you can.
I'm still not a David Hume fan. Like we'll be clear on that,
Right. But he was useful contrast. I mean, I think this is where people are confused by some of the Enlightenment characters saying, this Voltaire, for example, like everybody's, well, Voltaire is part of the Enlightenment. Voltaire's the clown to amuse the intellectuals. I hate to break it to you. He really was a clown. He was really, making jokes and poking fun all the time.
Very influential clown.
But I don't actually think he was. I think this is the Gnostic heretical pagan cults talking, right?
I just learned this history today, Mark. Can I regale you with it?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was this this town in southern France, Toulouse, right? Yeah. Extremely Catholic town, especially being propped up by the monarchy at that time. Mm-hmm. There were only about 200 Protestant Huguenots living there at the time. There was a particular family who, there was 2 grown sons, a daughter, servant, husband and wife, that sort of thing. They have dinner one night. The one son goes downstairs. The rest linger a little bit while longer. The others go downstairs, find him hung by the neck. He's dead. Horrible tragedy. right? And
Mm.
like the parents are weeping and crying, and they immediately call for the police, call for a doctor, these sorts of things. The rumor starts to go around that the young man had actually been murdered by his parents because he was planning on becoming a Catholic, but only secretly. Um, you can't find much evidence that this is actually happening there. It seems to be motivated by anti-Huguenot Protestant prejudice there. But ultimately, the father ends up getting executed. The other son gets exiled, and the daughters are locked away in a convent there. Right. So a really awful story right there. The Either the wife or one of the sons presents themselves to Voltaire in their their his villa, right, and tells this story, and like goes like, hey, there were no signs of violence on this guy's body, right, and this was happening at 8 p.m. On a busy street, like there's all sorts of reasons to believe that there was no conspiracy here, that this was a suicide. A very tragic story, only amplified by the response of their neighbors. Voltaire is very upset by this because this doesn't have anything to do with God. This doesn't have anything to do with Christianity. This is just a massive miscarriage of justice and a result of, why a good legal system doesn't leave things to the mob, but rather demands hard evidence beyond reasonable doubt. He goes on a big campaign and actually, like, he has an effect on this pre-revolutionary France. He's able to like solicit a pardon and an exoneration from the French king on account of this campaign that he leads to exonerate the La Calais affair. So
Yeah.
and he was rubbing elbows with. So is he like the biggest, most serious thinker in terms of ideas? No, I don't think he is, right? Like he's maybe a little bit shallow and a little
Right.
bit
It's not,
overspread,
but it's
but
not his
like
ideas.
his
It's not his ideas. It's his actions. Well, that
yeah, yeah,
now
yeah,
we're in a whole different realm. And so,
right.
but if you want to look at his actions, that's fine. Then he had no detrimental effect going forward on society. And therefore, you can't see either way you go, you can't throw him out as a bad, like you either have to exclude him from the philosophical side because he's a clown, which I think, guys, just read a little closer. He's clearly screwing with you. Clearly. There's no question about it. Like you got to see it. Like it may take a little if you take him seriously. Sure. Just like if you take Plato seriously, you think Plato is advocating for the complete equality of men and women in the Republic, which I'm sorry, but like you really missed a lot of funny stuff in the book. But I mean, he must bring it up at least half a dozen times that they should both be naked in the gymnasium. He's clearly not serious about this. He's clearly bringing it up to screw with you. And if you missed that, you shouldn't read those books. You shouldn't
And to be
listen to
fair,
those
it can be a
people.
little harder to pick up these jokes when they're translated, right?
I don't think so, because it's the repetition that really like closes the door on it.
So,
Like if
so,
you
so the image of Socrates that we're getting is that he really wants a co-ed gymnasium. He's just
right,
really looking out for
right,
this. Huh?
right. But it's even the way they bring it up and where they bring it up and the fact that they keep bringing it up in places that, like, we already put that to bed. Like all the serious philosophical stuff in the Republic is said exactly once and then built upon. And all the jokes are said over and over and over again, like any good comedian would do. Right. And so it's not easy. It's not hard to spot the jokes. And it's not hard to spot the philosophy. Right. And it's not hard to spot the problems with it. Right. Which is actually what Plato's talking about in the book. And this is the problem. And we could argue translations. Anselm Bloom has the best translation that anybody's ever considered for the Republic. Anyway, it really doesn't matter though, because we had 3 different ones on the book club, and there was some variation, but like it wasn't significant variation relative to what I'm talking about, because even in a bad translation, at scale, a bad translation will still get the same message across on a deep text. On a shallow text, it won't. Fair, but
A good translation is also a little bit more fun to read. So it is useful to know. Like the first time I read St. Augustine's Confessions, I read what is widely considered to be the worst translation of St. Augustine's Confessions. The experience was just miserable. I didn't get anything out of it, and I thought I didn't like Augustine until I read a much better translation, and it was far more enjoyable.
right, but that's more a function of the enjoyment and whatnot. It's not a function of the message.
Yeah.
It may affect your receptivity towards the message, so it is important, right? But it's not. It also doesn't matter. Ultimately, the message is still there. Again, it's going to be long enough text and a deep enough text, and the fact that there are jokes, and that's the problem when you don't understand cultivation, because that's like the story of the building of the United States is largely a story of cultivation. And that's the issue, is that you cultivate a culture, otherwise you get a bunch of cults. And when you stop cultivating the culture, you get a bunch of cults.
The trouble with cultivation is it's not at all like manufacturing. They're extremely different.
It's the
processes.
Opposite of manufacturing.
Right. And like we're very into manufacturing these days, where we can have everything precisely measured, we can have the machines precisely calibrated, we control exactly what kinds of raw materials and what quality go in.
But we're not
we
good
can
at
follow it step by step and get a consistent result.
We're not good
cultivation
at
isn't quite like that.
No, we're not good at that.
The Chinese
We're terrible at that. No, it's Japan and China and Korea and Vietnam. They're way better at that than we are. Light years. They're light.
We still value it. We still value it a lot.
Well, we seem to value it here, but that's actually not true. That's largely the result of the autism, actually. Like it's weird. Like I can just show you examples of people who say they value that and that they don't. They don't know that. You can't prove that to them. Fair enough, but like it's obvious to me. Because I'm a process guy. I write documentation. I take notes, right? I've gone to companies and given them full processes end to end. No one follows them. No one ever follows them. And not no one ever. I mean, I am successful at what I do, right? But like, especially the people who go, we need a process for this. I can tell you the person who's not going to follow any process. It's the guy who says we need a process. It's guaranteed. It's a never fail situation. The guys who go, we need a solution to a problem, they'll do whatever you tell them. They'll follow a process. They'll follow a chaos monkey. They'll make stuff up, right? Because the difference is some people want to get stuff done, and some people are actually not all that interested in getting stuff done. They might be interested in feeling busy, but those aren't the same thing. Right. And you can tell the difference, and it takes about 4.5 seconds. And if you don't have that skill, fair enough. Not everybody has the skill to tell. Right. But there are ways to tell, and most people can learn how to tell the difference between somebody who's serious and who gets stuff done and who just looks busy. And then the lazy people are usually more obvious, although the number of people that can't identify lazy people in 4 seconds is just always remarkable to me. And that's part of the problem, is that when you don't cultivate common skills, right? Because that's what common sense is. Common sense is not common sense to me about things. If I take those same things and I go to Europe, their common sense about those things is different. Nobody's ready to hear that. Nobody wants to hear it. They want the universalism. The common sense of what. So here, there's an easy example I'll use, since Edinburgh was brought up, and I've actually freaking been there now. Gorgeous city. Everybody should go there. My goodness, what an amazingly beautiful place. Just watch out, because there's nothing but zombies living there, but different problem. What to bring, common sense of what to leave the house with on any given day is extraordinarily different from common sense on what to leave the house with on any given day in South Carolina or even New England. Now, I always thought, because in New England, unlike most of the rest of the United States, the weather's very changeable. Very, very changeable. The only place the weather's more changeable than in New England is actually in the Appalachian Mountains, right? So if you're in Appalachia, you're by the mountains, you've got slightly more changeable weather. Everybody knows about that. But for non-mountainous region, New England's insane. Like the weather changes very fast. Okay. The weather is a slow, unchanging glacier compared to Edinburgh. Okay. Like it's unreal how quick things change over there. It's completely
Proximity to the ocean for you.
And well, no, it's warm ocean, cold ocean, right? And then the landmass isn't that big, right? So I think at the thickest part of the UK, it's 60 miles to the coast. That's not a lot of miles. I mean, I'm more than 60 miles from the coast. Right? It's like, what are you talking about? And so, but on one side you've got a cold ocean, on the other side you have a very warm ocean, thanks to the Gulf Coast, which mediates their weather. So they really don't have seasons the way we do at all. It's like you can just look it up. Like the temperature variation in Scotland is nothing compared to temperature variation in South Carolina.
That was G.K. Chesterton's observation. Was it's like, yeah, you know, the Americans, they're just dealing with like a constant either hellish heat or deep frost. You know, There's really not a whole lot of middle ground, and it's like, you know, I get the best of both worlds, right? Because you know, I get to live in Fargo during the winter, and then my bishop sends me out to Washington D.C. to study in the summer. So I get to deal with the whole range of American temperatures there. Yeah, but you know, like, so we could take a really simple example, right? I rarely ever carry around an umbrella when I'm in Fargo. Right? Because one, you know, the weather's a little more predictable. It doesn't rain all that often. And two, we live out of our cars in Fargo, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're never going to be more than about 10 to 15 seconds away from your next interior activity, unless you're specifically planning on spending time outside. Right. So like, there's really no need for me to carry an umbrella around. So what I didn't own an umbrella until I went to Washington, D.C., where in the summer, like we get these flash, you know, rainstorms that'll come in for like 2 minutes and then be gone. And I'm walking to and from campus because thankfully I get to live close enough where I don't have to drive, because we can both agree on the insanity of Washington, D.C. Traffic.
It would be a travesty to drive. It would probably take you just as long.
I'm sure it would. So like I just walk, you know, and I've gotten really good at like timing the lights and where I cross and but you know, now I have to carry an umbrella. So like it's common sense in Washington, D.C. to carry an umbrella around, but not in Fargo.
Right.
So it's Sally Joe. She gets it. The wind will just take your umbrella to Kansas. Yeah. If it's really raining, you got to put a raincoat on because that won't get ripped out of your hand.
Right. And that's different from New England, and that's different from South Carolina.
The rain comes straight down.
Right. I mean, everything's different. So the common sense is actually different. It's only common relative to the culture. And it is that commonality that it's weird. Like everybody knows we're missing things in common. And then they're all coming up with their own pet theories about why. And I'm like, did you not understand you're the problem here? Like you're contributing to the error. Could you please not do that? That would be fantastic. But they can't see the water they swim in or something. So yeah, they don't really understand the breadth and depth of their own contribution to that issue of lack of commonality. But the lack of commonality, you know, that's part of the recession of the church, because culture comes from religion. That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from anywhere else. And it's not a one-to-one relationship. This is what I was thinking of when you were talking. Like everyone's going to think it's a one-to-one relationship. We live in a flat world and everybody thinks everything's linear and discrete. Things are not linear and discrete. It's a one religion to many relationship. That's why it's one universal holy Catholic Church, right? In Rome,
with a vast number of particular churches underneath that umbrella and in
Exactly.
communion with the
Right.
top. Yeah.
Right. And that's the way to solve the problem. And the problem can't be solved any other way, technically. Like if you mapped it in mathematics, you'd figure this out in 4 seconds. Right? If you mapped it on a graph with geometry, you'd figure it out in 6 seconds because it takes you a couple seconds to draw. Right? Like it's not that hard.
Yeah, it's really interesting that Andrew would say this. The only culture in America that makes sense to me is Southern California, which I just have to assume he was raised there because I don't know how else you would ever come to the conclusion.
The one
Every other
state
part of America
Yeah, the
feels
one
like a
state
one
that doesn't
country.
have a culture. That's amusing. Right. Now that part of the state developed something that they think is a culture, but anybody
Just
there would
driving in
argue that
cars all day, isn't it?
well, but anybody there would argue that there isn't a culture in Southern California. They talk about they talk about the lifestyle. They don't talk about the culture.
Yeah, and the lifestyle, as far as I can tell, is just sitting behind a car wheel all day, every day.
No. The California lifestyle is outdoors, and the California lifestyle is all about, see, because they have little societies they call cultures, like surf culture. A surf culture is not a culture, right? It's a society of surfers who have only surfing and their laziness in common, roughly speaking. Right? That's it. And
So
it's very
society
much
would
like
be
Hawaii.
a society in your estimation would be a less thick tie than a culture would be.
Yeah, societies
I think that
exist.
maps pretty well.
Yeah, societies exist within culture. The problem people are having with language right now, the number one problem, is hierarchy. Like they want to make words equal and then they want to say this is really that. And I'm like, bro, a lot of these things are one too many, with the one thing being on top of the little things below, relationships. And if you don't understand the words in terms of the hierarchy they are in, then you're just misusing the language. And 90% of everything that you see problem-wise is people just misusing the language left, right, and center. They're constantly doing this nonsense where there's no difference between a society and a culture. Oh, yes, there is. Culture holds together different societies. Oh, what? Right. And it's not that hard, right? And then if you don't understand cultivation culture, for example, right, because you're not steeped in Latin, even though you failed it miserably, and then you don't understand these things, and you're not going to. Like, you're never going to understand language correctly if you don't understand the hierarchical nature of the words you're using. Hey, Jim.
Hello. Good to be Catholic. Thank the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
We are living in interesting times. As the Chinese proverb saying, I don't know whether that's a curse or a blessing.
It's a curse.
But, yeah. But I don't know. There's a lot of speculators about the conclave, and especially a lot of atheists and feminists, and they, to me, miss the essence of that. We all believe as Catholics, especially traditional Catholics like me, the intercession of Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit within the conclave, and that religious nature which people don't understand. Same as with the sacrament of confession, they can't understand why the priests cannot divulge or disclose the confession. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I do appreciate the gravity with which the conclave is taken, and I know it does turn into like a bit of a media spectacle. They've got like the cameras pointed at the chimney at all times, and they've got all the different talking heads talking about all the stuff that they want to talk about. But really, the traditions that have formed around it, and the way that most of the cardinals conduct themselves is really it's really edifying. It's really edifying to see such a high office be taken with the gravity that it deserves, and not being subject to reality TV like disclosure, like it's not treated the same. Like you don't get to C-SPAN, broadcast of the conclave proceedings there. It's like, no, this is actually just going to be hidden away from you,
Exactly.
so that the sacred duty which is given to the College of Cardinals, it's one of their two jobs. That one of them is to advise the Pope, and the next is to elect the next Pope. That's their two jobs, right? The sacred duty that they have, so they can do it with the maximum amount of freedom, and they can speak with, hopefully, an incredible amount of candor with each other, because I don't think being nice is called for once you're locked up in the Sistine Chapel. Like if you think a guy's a stinking heretic, or you think he has no idea how to manage money, you may as well just say that out loud. So it's good to be Catholic, just like you said, Jim.
And I really mean it. The other thing, which is sort of, as a layman, interested, just following the news generally, is I didn't know till just the other day that 60% of the cardinals in the last 12 years were chosen by Pope Francis. And again, my personal, how would I put it politely, impression, for me as a traditional Catholic, I find his liberation theology a bit too much to swallow. Again, I did not dissent and open up a Protestant church or become a Sedevacanist or anything like that. I still do go to the Novus Ordo Mass, which is very close to where I live. But on the other hand, if I really want to go to church, I've got to drive about 45 miles away to go to the church, which allows traditional Latin Mass. And that church is full compared to the other one. That's all I'm saying. You mentioned G.K. Chesterton. Well, didn't he say one of the famous things is the Catholic Church, the role of the Catholic Church is I understand. And I'll get his quote, which I just love his quote. He's, bear with me, because I should remember it by now. And it says, verbatim quote, we belong to a Catholic Church not guided to move with the world, but rather founded to move the world. And I think there's a lot of meaning in that. So what the Novus Ordo since post-Vatican II is to, go with the flow, the trends, the current culture, as opposed to tradition. So, when someone says, the 2,000 years of Latin language of the church being church language, I call it the dead language. I think it's very alive. 1.4 million Catholics used to pray. If you go to any church, from Africa, South America, Asia, Australia, Europe, China, whatever, and you could join the Mass. It's like someone coming to your family, or to us in Australia, you're in America, or Canada for Mark, as I understand, is stop speaking English. You have to, from now on, speak only Portuguese. Well, yeah, it is a Latin, the roots, etymology of English is 50% Latin, but still would be very difficult. And ignoring that tradition, it takes the mystique, the transcendental, as I see it, again, subjectively speaking. And I think post-Vatican II, the new church, Catholic Church, I pray to God, if another radical, that's my prediction, I shouldn't predict, but Parliament, there's few of them, I'm not going to go through the list, gets elected, I think that we may, hope not, I hope I'm wrong, face a third schism. First being with the Orthodox in 1054, then Martin Luther, and I'm thinking about myself. I hope I don't live it, but unfortunately, well, I don't know. That's my take.
Yeah, it's it's a job that any person who has any understanding of what they're getting into should absolutely tremble with fear to try and do it, because Jim, you and I feel a lot of the same things about a lot of the same things, right? Like, I am a traditional Latin Mass enjoyer. I love and I feel deeply honored to be able to offer that for the folks in my town, and I've got constant anxiety about like the future of this, because these people are very devoted and attached to it. I think it's a good thing that can, bring them closer to Christ by the mercy of God and cooperation with the Holy Spirit. So you've got that group of people. And just today, I was sitting next to a priest who was ordained in 1972. And he was a part of the generation that brought all these changes about. And, he bought into it. He was told that this is where we're going now, and this is what we're up to. And he spent a great portion of his life and his energy dedicated to promoting a particular vision of the church. And the Pope, who is put as the vicar of Christ and as a special care and solicitude for the whole church, has to be the Pope for both of us. And that's a very difficult job right there, to like try and figure out how to keep the both of us contented and in the mainstream. Now, I think Benedict XVI had the right idea with Summorum Pontificum, and that there's nothing intrinsically toxic about the Latin Mass, and we shouldn't be treating it as if it was toxic waste that was going to infect the people, and even hoping for a mutual enrichment between the two. Although, frankly, in my opinion, I think the enrichment will go more one way than the other. But you still have to be the Pope to a massively diverse group of people who could all agree on, let's say, everything that we could find in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and still find a lot of things to disagree about. So it's a terrible, terrible burden there, which is why the instinct of the church in times like this is always very correct, is first to pray for the soul of the deceased who carried that terrible burden and will face a terrible judgment. No doubt about that. The one to whom more is given, more will be expected, and it's like, oh, you had universal, ordinary, immediate, supreme jurisdiction over the entire church. Like, that's plenty right there. And then second, to pray for a worthy successor, and third, to continue to pray for that successor to govern well. So that's the times that we find ourselves in.
Well, I think that's part of the problem when you point up. You can't appreciate what it would be like to be in charge of something that large. You can't. Sorry. I don't care what you've done in your past. You can't. You have to do that before. And so any action they take from your perspective has to be wrong. It has to be, right? Except by accident. Like, oh, it just happens to align with what I feel this day, right? So you don't really know. And then that's the problem. Like, you're not actually in a position to judge, because you're one person and they're responsible for all these other persons and this huge hierarchy. Like, sometimes you have to toe a line that you don't agree with to get done something else. And that trade-off could be worth it, right? Like, I don't know, right? Is it worth not starting a war to say, oh, you know what? We all worship the same God and it'll be fine in the end. If that's what was on the line, sure. Do I think that's what was on the line? No, but it doesn't matter, and who knows, how many cardinals you piss off and what effect that has. And, do they then take away the Latin Mass that they, who knows what happened behind closed doors, and it's weird because people, they don't even assign the same sorts of importance to these things. Like a lot of people are making a lot of hay about, we don't even have a president anymore, and what happened, how can the country run, and which is about the dumbest thing you can say as an American in America, because everybody knows the president is optional. The only reason we have a president is in case we have a war, roughly speaking. The president has like 3 tasks and they're infrequent at best. And so, yeah, the country is actually designed to run without a president. There's a lot of discussion in the founding of this country about whether or not we even needed one ever, or whether or not you would vote one in from Congress if, as part of your articles of war. That was shot down, by the way, obviously. But like those same people who were panicking about that don't seem panicked at all about not having a pope for quite a while until, until everything's said and done, which is really mysterious, right? Because you don't understand the nature of hierarchy if you think that a head needs to be there, we'll say 24/7. The body can sustain itself quite some time. People's heads have been reattached, for real. Like this is not unheard of. And we don't, because people don't understand the top level, but think they do. And they have this really small version of hierarchy, really flat version of hierarchy, where they can't even tell words are differentiable. That's why we have separate words. People just speculate endlessly and wonder endlessly, and they don't. I heard somebody talking, and they were like, "Did you know there's all these political things going on at the Vatican?" I'm like, the Vatican's the most political place on the planet, and it always has.
We've been doing politics longer than anybody else.
Anybody else, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and there's more on the line. There's more at stake. And I was just shocked that everybody doesn't know that. But apparently everybody doesn't know that. I'm like, they're political all the time, not just when they're electing a pope, because the next 3 popes are already, or next 3 potential popes are already vying for either this slot or the next one. Like, it's a mess over there. Some of them have the long game. 30 years, it's going to be me. Like, it's crazy over there. It's nuts.
One good thing, this is the new book about biography of George Pell, Cardinal George Pell, by
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Cardinal Pell. Gosh, I wish he was eligible for election, but
it's by Tess Livingston. I've ordered it, so I'm looking forward to it. The other sort of thing is, which I read, it's from a Catholic conservative, where Italian Freemasonry has formally officially supports Pope Pageau. I mean, Pius the 10th, or I think Pius the 10th. There's a encyclical on that and various statements, and this is the confusion. And as I said, devil loves confusion. Absolutely, that's it, putting it in a nutshell. Confusing the people, confusing people, red people, uneducated, educated, you name it. And that's the problem, I think. But the church has always faced more or less issues and problems, which are another thing you can't sort of reconcile. The youngest order are supposed to be the Jesuits. Okay. And they got the special order to protect the Pope, thing, and they played an incredible role in Reformation. It's supposed to be our intellectual class, most educated. Formation used to last for 15 to 18 years before you were ordained, but now they're most radical in a sense of adopting that Marxist liberation, South American liberation theology. And it's sort of totally, to me, is alien. I don't know. I just can't reconcile in my logic, in my thinking. maybe I'm not that smart, but anyway. So, and that's that confusion, dichotomy, the problem I'm having. And do you think, for example, when I go to another order, I usually sort of sit on a corner in a church, but when I take communion, I don't go to about half a dozen women. I go all around to the priest, and you can't genuflect, but I take it on the tongue, open the mouth, which is okay. See, that's one of those things. Maybe I'm too old-fashioned. Whatever, call me whatever you want, but that's how I genuinely believe. And the church, you think of the tradition. Oh yeah, the church where I go to, there was a beautiful altar taken away, and there's a stick and a tabernacle put it in its place, and two big sort of angels. I asked myself, who ordered that? Dismantling of an altar which was consecrated to new church by Cardinal Gilroy in 1959, 1960. How do you explain that? It's like those people obliterating history. All right, you're a Novus Order, you've got the altar facing the people, but why get rid of the tradition? How do you explain that?
Well, but you can't hold on to tradition forever. You can't. The world changes.
I'm angry at myself, really. I am.
Wait, but Jim, it's like that is the hard problem. If there is a hard problem, that is the hard problem of the world. The world changes. What's the rate of change, and when should the change be done? And then what change should be done? That's that. Like, I don't know. Like, no one's going to get that right. No one.
And I think that we've got some insurance on these things. So we've got Luke's here. I've noticed that there are people in my church who are beginning to kneel before the priest during the reception of communion. And I'd say the more converts a particular church has, the more children a particular church has, the more we could say those are externally measurable signs of growth, but you can kind of get a feel for the excitement and the fervor of people's faith when you spend time with them. The more of this kind of stuff, at least in my area, you tend to see people kind of returning to what were considered more traditional manners of being, more traditional ways of receiving communion, for instance, and that seems to be, I think, a really good argument for, we probably changed a little bit too much. The fact that oftentimes the young people who are most serious about their faith are the ones who desire to bring this back the most. There was something lost there. So that can just be a sign of confidence. We could take this. We can sit here. We could just be all upset about how bad things are, and Lord knows there's plenty of reason for that. You'll never run out of reasons to be upset about bad things. But we really have to believe that God is absolutely in charge of history, and that His providence orders all of these things, and that He wouldn't have allowed disasters to happen throughout history if there wasn't some plan behind all of that there wasn't some possibility of all of this being redeemed, right? And so I have a dream, Jim, and I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but it could happen, right?
Could happen, yeah.
I dream of a great big ecumenical conference, right? And then there's the Metropolitan Archbishop of some ancient see in the East, and he has observed the way that Catholics are treating their own tradition, especially the highly educated, highly European cardinals and monsignors and bishops that are all around him. And he goes up there and very straightforwardly says, "We will not have communion with you until you learn to respect the tradition of the apostles," and then goes on a traditionalist rant worthy of Athanasius Snyder, right? So, like, what if the disaster of 1051 and the long schism between East and the West, what if one of the long-term fruits that the Lord was going to draw out of that disaster was to remind the West about her own traditions when she was most likely to forget about them. And if we have faith that all of the turmoil that came subsequent to Vatican II and all of the highly dopey implementation that people were subjected to, that God really did allow that for his own purposes, then we're ultimately going to be able to draw some fruit from all of this. And, we pray to God for the next guy who's got to be Pope and deal with all of this mess, because it's hard enough to deal with one parish compared to like the whole world.
This is where my lack of theology or biblical studies are noted. My understanding, can you hear me?
Yeah, so I don't have my headphones and my laptop fan is running at full blast.
I don't know, I've got a really bad system, but my understanding, there are certain things which are absolute in terms of the doctrine of the Catholic Church, unchangeable. That's my understanding. Absolute. Let's start from the 10th commandment. There's a variance. For example, thou shalt not kill. We all know in the Catholic Church there is a just war. There's also justification in self-defense, killing someone, trying to preserve your life. So, of course, there are exceptions, but that's all been built up by the church fathers throughout the 2,000 years of the Catholic tradition, unbroken tradition. So when we come up with things like the Pope, that famous statement when he said he was asked by a female reporter on the plane about what's your stand or view on a homosexual priest, and he said, "Who am I to judge?" Well, I beg your pardon, you are the head, the temporal head of the Catholic Church on earth. You are. It's probably a hard decision, but of all people, you should know your Catholic catechesis and doctrine, which are absolute. And that would be, to me, the easiest question. Das ist verboten in Germany. There you are. Whatever you want to say, or English or Latin. But that's that confusion. By making that statement, I cringe. I go, well, hold on. Do you understand what I'm saying? If he doesn't know being ambiguous on that type of answer, which is a straightforward question, how am I going to defend my Catholic Church? What am I supposed to believe? My family, my grandkids, what are they going to inherit? That's the frightening thing. Forget about me.
We've all been kind of dealing with the confusions of the times and the confusions that can in certain instances be laid at the feet of the deceased Roman pontiff here. And it's we can sit here and be upset about it, and I'm not going to sit here and
I pray. We have to pray. We have to pray for a rosary, absolutely.
But it's also been a revelatory moment of how I think, we can think of the Catholic way of sense making, right? Authentic Catholic culture always coming on a three-legged stool of scripture, tradition, and magisterium. And I know I've had a intro to the podcast that talked about them and how they're all different and very complementary, right? With scripture being very fixed, the text is fixed for us. The words on the page aren't going to go moving around for us, and so it gives us a very fixed load point there. The magisterium is constantly getting new members in and out of it, right? So bishops die, we appoint new bishops. They're the living embodiment there, so they're the most flexible part. And then the tradition kind of comes in between, is really just this massive overarching category of things that we're just kind of a part of. And some parts of the tradition don't change, and some parts of the tradition might change very slowly. And then there's like also parts of it that kind of spring up quickly, and then they might fade away. like various devotions that might have been super popular in the 17th century, which are no longer practiced, and they were fine for the time and are no longer in place there. And I think, especially in Anglosphere Catholicism, during the turmoil immediately following Vatican II, all of a sudden 1978 comes around, we get John Paul II, and John Paul II was able to enunciate Catholic doctrine in a more or less clear way, especially when he had Ratzinger as his editor. That helped keep things nice and clear and sharp, because John Paul II was very smart, but he wasn't always clear what he was talking about, right? I don't know if you can relate to that at all, Mark. But and then we get Benedict, and Benedict's like the greatest theologian of the 20th century. He's at least top five.
True intellectual.
Yeah, a true intellectual. And also given the gift of brevity and clarity and getting straight to the point, which is a beautiful thing. And so I think there was a weakened habit of mind, especially among English-speaking Catholics, that anytime there was going to be a doctrinal dispute, we just got to wait about 6 months, and then the Pope is just going to come in here and resolve this, and Daddy's just going to take care of us, and we don't have to worry about it all that much. Now, frankly, it's not bad to have that, but it's also not the only way for us to have a certain amount of clarity on what we should be doing and the way we should be living. We've got a vast history that we can reference. We can, make reference to those things that have been taught everywhere at all times, according to the formula of St. Vincent of Lérins that I can't really fully remember now. The various catechisms that have been promulgated throughout history, all of these sort of things. And yeah, I think that's that should be a sign of hope for the robustness of the church. And I think, the time under Francis, when all of a sudden we had a very different manner of speaking from the Roman Pontiff, and some genuinely confusing and disturbing statements from him, that we would learn to strengthen those muscles and to make those arguments in a different way, rather than merely relying upon the Roman Pontiff to answer every single one of our questions. So that's where I'm hoping to see God in history there, and we'll see how that goes. It's been interesting to see a lot of Catholic content creators who are critical of Pope Francis striking a more reconciliatory tone after his death. Gives me some hope. And Ixnay kind of nails it, don't speak ill of the dead. And there's really not much that can be accomplished by like a really harsh and pointed criticism at this point, because the guy whose mind you might want to change is dead. And we need to, but there is a certain amount of reflection and what happened and where do we go from here that's also useful to engage in. So
it's not being critical ad hominem. I mean, I'm sure we can understand his tradition. His family escaped, as I understand, fascist Italy, Mussolini, to Argentina. So you can see this certain, how will I put it, left-wing proclivities. I'm not saying that his parents were very pious. He was one of 4 or 5 or 6 children, as I understand. But that aura of Jesuit South American dominance and identity, which is nothing wrong with that. The work they did with, going into factories and working and identifying the poor of the poor. That it's incredible tradition, which is unseen in any other continent or country, as I understand. But having, by virtue of being, choosing the name Francis of Assisi, the champion of the poor, rich man throwing away his riches and going with the destitute. It's a sort of a reflection in itself, as I see. But it is praying, I think, we can sort of constructively, not criticize, but examine his deeds. We might love it or hate it or dislike, but that's history. And there's no bad aspersion on his character per se. But I genuinely hope, again, I'm proud of it, that the church sets the pace rather than follows the modern society. And just last point, which I like to make, as I understand it, especially in America, in our secular world, and their young people also, they're totally misguided and they want guidance. And you see in prisons, my wife works with legal aid, and I tend to keep away from criminal law. But if you ever go to a prison and rebellious young men, they either convert to Islam or a structured hierarchical church, which is the Orthodox Church. Catholicism has lost this zest, and I will, again, that's my humble opinion. It's not a psychological or sociological research paper, peer approved, is that we've relaxed. We've become just one more Protestant denomination. Go with the flow rather than say the buck stops here. So thus you get old foes as Freemasons all of a sudden praising. That could be
Tim, you've got a long
7 million Americans have joined Orthodox, and we all know Orthodox I'm talking about is a national church, and nothing against Orthodoxy. So if you're an American, Anglo-American white, are you going to become Greek or Ukrainian or Russian or Bulgarian and learn Bulgarian in order to attend church masses or services, whatever they call?
Well, they don't care about that. Like they don't care about that at all.
But I understand the psychology behind it. I think I do, because they need
I don't
something in their life.
I mean, the Orthodox are ethnic. That's why there's an American Orthodox Church now, right? Like, and they don't do the Russian or the Greek, because there's a Greek church down the street too, right? But the issue is there's still a split between what people say and what message they need to send. So the problem, for example, with the term Christian, which to me is completely meaningless post Reformation, but it just cannot have a cohesive meaning, is that
that's right.
There's a bunch of bad actors claiming commonalities, which, they don't have, right? They just claim them because it's easy to interpret something like all roads lead back to the Creator, which is very much a belief that's even in Judaism, right? It's Old Testament and New Testament explicit, right? As, all Calvinism stems from that idea. Like, okay, fair enough, right? And so the statement that, all roads lead back to the Creator, right? And therefore it doesn't matter which religion, where is that line, right? I don't know. I don't think anybody should ever say anything like that. I think it matters quite a bit. But also, it's not
the example of the Holy Apostles was there's no other name in heaven and earth by which men are going to be saved, except the name of Jesus Christ. I usually just say that, and if it was good enough for Peter and Paul in the first century, it's probably good enough for me. So yeah, that's what I teach, and if anybody doesn't like it, then they can go to another church, I guess.
Right. But leads back and saved are different. And like the Catholic idea of saved, the Orthodox idea of saved, and the Protestant idea of saved, that there's almost no overlap with the Protestants on anything. And that's where the problem is.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they claim, put it simply, they claim they've got a direct line to Jesus. You don't need the structure, you don't need the history, you do not need the culture. It's your reading and your connection. No works or anything. It's just you and Jesus. You're saved.
Well, it depends. Yeah, it depends which denomination, but they all have the out of you book God.
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
it's right. It's not even you book Jesus. It's you book God.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's really sneaky. Right. They can technically at any time, and they almost always do, if you talk to them for 10 minutes, they almost always get that out the minute they get trapped. They go, well, really, it's just me, book God, the Father, right? It's like, what? Right? And then they usually die on that hill, although they die pretty quickly on it, I must admit. But they're not, because of that problem of we don't want to burn them at the stake, although maybe some of us do. What do you do about that, right? Because you still want to invite them in, and that's where the problems of the implementation, at least of Vatican II, come in. And that's all momentum from the split.
Yeah.
That happens to a lot of people. And then they go, everyone's leaving the church. Now, you notice the only people saying everyone's leaving the church are Protestants, right? Because the Orthodox and Catholics are seeing resurgence. And you can't tell the Protestants.
A good run of people leaving the church. There was, it's been rough. And the, we have had a nice, turn in the number of people who are coming in and coming back in. But it still isn't making up for the losses yet. So
no, and it won't. The large big church has a slower everything. It's right. Turns are slow in large objects. The Catholic Church is a large object.
You're not going to turn it with a canoe paddle.
You're not going to. Well, you are, but it's going to take a long time. And you know what? You only have a canoe paddle. This is what nobody wants to admit. It's all nice and well and good to talk about turning the Titanic before it hits the iceberg you see, but you have a canoe paddle. That's it. That's all you have. You have this little panel of sliver to move the boat. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It just means you need to be realistic about the momentum factor and how long these things take. And it's a good sign that people who never had. They never had that old tradition. Young people, they never saw it. In many cases, they never heard about it directly from anybody. Not directly, they may have read about it. Are reinstantiating that. That tells you there's something intuitive, right? So you get all these people talking about, well, things come from the bottom. Things come from the bottom. And you show them from the bottom, there's a thread of tradition that keeps recurring. It goes away, and then it comes back. Doesn't that tell you? It doesn't tell them anything because they're stupid and they're rebelling. They don't actually want answers. They want things to be different, right? But it's very clear, this pattern. It doesn't matter what you do. The people want this. And eventually that will filter up and then come back down, which is how it always has worked. Always. It's never not worked that way. Now, it doesn't only work that way, and that confuses people, right? They see a great man in history, which doesn't really exist, but whatever. That's what they see.
Or popular movement?
Well, the thing is, popular movements vanish immediately without a leader.
Right.
So popular movements with leaders are called great man movements, or conform to great man theory or something. And no one understands. It's like, no, the pattern's there. The difference in the pattern is whether or not somebody leads it, right? And leadership is not one thing, and so it's very hard to understand. And I don't know how well I got at it in my book, which is coming out at the end of next month, by the way. But
is it really what? Oh, I must get it.
It is Navigating Wisdom Communities. We'll try to get you one down under there, Jim. I'll try to get you.
All right, no worries.
Yeah, like leadership isn't one thing, and so it doesn't work one way. And so you can look at things like charisma and then go, well, charisma is bad because, and it's like, no, charisma is inevitable. So you better figure that out. And also it's damn handy if you want people to follow you. Now, if they're not good people, then the charisma doesn't end up being good, right? But also, if it is a good person and they're charismatic, boy, that sure is handy. It moves the needle quicker and larger, right? It moves a larger group. So, but people don't like that because they want like one scapegoat. They want one scapegoat for the whole thing. And so it's easy to say so-and-so was charismatic and that's why people followed them. And I'm like, that is so not why people follow. And it's like, I know lots of charismatic people that can't get followers. It's not that hard. Right? It's just a complicated thing. But the fact that people keep coming back to certain patterns means those patterns eventually are going to reinstantiate. And it probably won't be, Jim, unfortunately, in your lifetime, which really sucks. But the church takes a very long time to turn, because there's a few people with canoe paddles turning the Titanic away from an iceberg.
It's bigger than the biggest American aircraft carrier. That's the church, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, it's complicated too, because like the mess, and a lot of problems happen because of this, right? Like a lot of the messaging for Vatican II was really meant only for the European continent. Wasn't actually meant for America, because America didn't have those, and probably not Australia, right? But the messaging, like, you can't have a universal message at some level. You just can't. And so that's why the hierarchy and the filtering, this is why everybody shouldn't be looking up to the Pope and listening on his every word, because that message probably isn't for you at all.
Yeah, which is why I'm longing for a Pope that will speak in a public forum once every 6 months, maybe. And then otherwise it's all private replies via his cardinal advisors from the dicasteries.
Just, one final thing. The youngest cardinal is Australian cardinal. He's 45. He's actually Ukrainian Catholic.
I read about this guy.
You can. I don't know his name. It's very hard to pronounce. But he's the only cardinal, 138, whatever, 140 cardinals. He's 45, and he's born in Ukraine. He lives in Australia, and he's Eastern Orthodox or Catholic Orthodox, and he will be in the conclave.
Did you put in a good word for Father Eric, Jim? Come on, we've got a campaign going here.
Sure did.
Excellent.
Non parlo italiano bene.
I like that. What's it called? Pizza bowler from the Middle East. From I think it's Lebanese or Cardinal. I forget his first name. I like him very much. I've read a few of his things and so forth. But anyway, it's all papabilas. We're all guessing, or especially the secular media.
They just think it's another election, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Nothing more than election season, because that drives viewership.
Right, and they don't understand the number of potential candidates, because they only understand two-party systems, right? Or two front-runner systems.
Yeah.
In the case of Europe, it's just two front-runner systems. They don't worry about the other things because they actually don't matter, right? And so they're worried about things like first past the post, but unless you're embroiled day to day in the most political place on the planet, which is the Vatican, then you don't have a hope of. I mean, their predictions are horrific. They're never.
What I like is Cardinal Sarah from Africa.
Be very happy about that. You might see videos of me on YouTube being very happy about that.
Yes,
and throwing
that's my preferences. They're not worth much, but anyway.
We need that diversity. I gotta have it in order to be progressive enough church.
It's
we
time
need
we
that
had
level of diversity. Yeah, gotta have one.
All right, I got a question from David here that I want to start talking to. Can Vatican II possibly be abolished, Father Eric? Reverend Michael Debate suggested the new Pope do that in a recent sermon on YouTube, and then he's gives the name of here, the Reverend Michael to say, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think I've never heard of any kind of, let's say, properly done magisterial act that would have the character of infallibility or ever being undone there. I think if you will reference my video in defense and praise of Vatican II, that there's plenty of stuff that we should want to keep, that were real accomplishments that were done at that time. I think the thing that most people are most paying attention to is the new missal and the revised rites in that, and that's, I think, has the most possibility of actually being like undone, because it really was the most spectacular act of raw papal power to promulgate those in the form that they were in all history. And what one pope can do without reference to, his duties of being the guardian of the perennial tradition, or that sort of thing. Like what one pope can do with just raw papal power, another pope can just undo. Now, I don't think it would be wise to all of a sudden tell every priest that they can only use the 1962 missal. I think there would be a better way forward than that. So I don't see any possibility of Vatican II just being outright abolished and us somehow like pretending that it didn't happen, especially when, a document like Dei Verbum or Lumen Gentium has an awful lot to recommend itself, even for anybody who'll give it a chance. You'll find, most of it is a great representation of the perennial doctrine of the Church. Or there are things that are obviously outdated, like the decree on social communications. There's obviously things that would need to be updated just because of the changing landscape there. And I don't think anybody would say that that's like heresy, that they didn't anticipate the existence of the internet. They were dealing with radios and newspapers and just now television for that. Yeah, so I'm just going to give that a quick no, in case you didn't understand the rest of that explanation there.
Where's the full video from you, Father Eric, about implementation versus documentation, we'll say. And maybe that would fill the gap of what everyone's upset about.
Implementation, that sounds like a lot of work. So you're asking me to do a video, right? Not one that I've already done.
Yeah, well, I thought the one that you referenced earlier was going to be the one where you discussed more. The problem of Vatican II is the implementation, not the documentation.
Well, I think that's a matter for a much more skilled historian than myself, because we're kind of at the point where you'd need the tools of history rather than canon law to deal with this. It's all
you
kind
can
of
go through it in canon law and say these other changes are not supported by this document.
Yeah. Well, it's not coming this week. I hope to have something ready for tomorrow, next week, because I've got an obligation on Cinco de Mayo, but it won't be nearly that long or well thought out.
No, I'm
what we come up with.
I'm planting the seeds and trying to cultivate this because we've been talking about it for a while, and I really would like to hear, that.
You're manipulating me. That's fine. That's fine.
Cultivation is here. Cultivation is here.
Vatican II is considered a full ecumenical council by the West, not by the East, obviously, but not everything that is. So there's, when Mark talks about not everything is for everybody, here's like reason number one is that not everything that's written in there is infallible. And in fact, very often when the church writes these things, writes them as an opinion that could change later. So, sometimes that's now a great deal of Vatican II is a restatement and a reformulation of what's come before. So we're not all that terribly worried about it. Like, Jesus Christ is the head of the church. It's like, okay, yeah, we're right there in Scripture. You're just repeating something, but it's useful to repeat that so everybody can remember. But the church can, even the supreme authority of the church can promulgate something as an opinion, and you need to actually know how to read these documents. You need to have a sense of like the whole history of theology and where to go reading after these things before you can even begin to say, okay, this one's probably like binding doctrine forever, and well, this one's a bit of a new thing here, and we might be able to, if like you heard something in a homily and you weren't quite sure about it, it might not be quite so. So again, with all of a sudden we're publishing these things on the internet in the vernacular rather than just throwing it out there in the Latin for the experts,
Right. Would you be more precise? It'd be like Latin is highly legalistic. It's an excellent language for legalism. It's fantastic for that. Just like it would be great for programming. It's like solid types. I love it. Yeah. And that. But again, the real problem is once you open the door for change, you have a momentum of change. It's always dangerous. And a lot of people are they're running around with the "what are you conserving" thing, and it's like that's not what conservation means. But I understand their point. Also, it's stupid to say.
See, words have meanings, and precedents, although not etched in writing, are dangerous, or could be potentially dangerous. I always think very simplistically. Imagine you're in a boat and there is a small leakage, just a pin, and the water is seeping into your boat, and that could sort of expand, and then you can sort of manage it, block it with the hand or with something around it. But there is a point where you cross the Rubicon, and in law, in our common law, as you all know, the side statute law is basically precedent law,
right?
And to overturn you've got to go to the highest court. The highest court in America is your Supreme Court,
right?
9 judges, and it's very difficult to overturn anything if it's got a million cases or whatever on a point or a word. So that's that uncertainty which I'm grappling with personally. It's not here or there, left or right. And how do I, as a layperson, make sense of it, explain things to my family or my grandkids or to anyone who challenges the Catholic Church? And I like how everyone challenges the Catholic Church. The reason being is, again, I go to Satan or the devil. If you want to demolish something, the devil always attracts something which is the truth. It doesn't attack so much orthodoxy or anybody.
Right.
For example, the whole fiasco with the priests and the damage done to the church for the last 10, 20 years. I'm sure there are other denominations, including normal public schools, but they're not picked on, because it's that sort of trying to conflate Catholicism and my argument, for example, I look at this priest, look at that. I said, look, if your brother is a murderer, does that make you a murderer or the whole family? And it's, again, we go back to free will, individual human being creating in the image of God. You can't tarnish the whole family unless all of them are like that. So what I'm getting at is the continual fight, especially now modernism. You mentioned Voltaire and Montesquieu and all the Freemasonic revolutionaries which have managed to overthrow the church. Forget about the hierarchy of the kings, and which is the introduction of our modern world, and the biggest rebels, as I see it, unfortunately or fortunately, are Protestantism, because Protestants have managed to create our so-called modern, enlightened society. I wonder where that word is also mentioned. Enlightenment and all that in the. I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, but what I'm getting at is it's all interconnected, and I'm not fighting. I do realize that secularism has prevailed, and natural state of man, as I see it, they have to believe in something, and unfortunately, if you take away God or your belief, you have to believe in another man, and that is the tragedy. That's what Marxism is all about, or any ism, fascism, Nazism, communism, you name it. You have to believe in the ideology rather than anything above that.
But that's the sort of the problem that I state is if you believe you don't have a religion, one will be provided to you without your knowledge.
To you, exactly. Yeah. You have to believe in something.
Well, you do believe in something. You are like the world is all final cause. At the end of the day, like it's not only final cause, but it all final cause, right? And so you're pointing at something. You're aiming towards something. And if you don't know what that is, you just get swept up in it. And I think, listen, so why in the Vatican II documents would they restate who the head of the church was? That's obviously a shot across the bow at the Protestants. Obviously, that's what it is. They don't believe the Protestants. They say the Pope is the head of the church. The Pope is not the head of the church, right? They need to die on that hill. Because if they're wrong about that, and of course they're wrong about pretty much everything, so they're certainly wrong about that, then their arguments all start to fall down, right? Because their arguments are predicated on there's one tyrannical dictator at the top of the Catholic Church telling everybody how to live their lives in their private homes. It's like,
yeah. I try and tell people how to live their lives, and then they just go and do whatever they want. So.
Yeah, as if that would even work, right? It's like, yeah, so what? So the Pope said this. Who cares? Nobody, did he say it to you personally? Right. And that's always where the problem is, and people want that. Like it's right. It's biblical, right? Like they wanted a king. Well, there you go. How do you get a king? You beg for one. There you go. And they don't, people kind of think like, well, that was anachronistic or, back then or, all it's like, no. The Bible is a bunch of stories about how humans are, right? And non-negotiably, we'll say, right? Inevitably, how people behave. And then you're supposed to learn from those stories how to deal with those situations. And the great, we'll say, sin of secularism is what I call the agenosis, right? Where propositions become the highest value because they're the highest form of knowledge or something, which is completely backwards from reality, but whatever. And when you act as if you flatten the world down to propositions, which, how do I tell you how beautiful my yard smells now because we have flowers blooming? It's dumb. I can't convey that.
You could write a poem.
That's right.
and it wouldn't work. Like it would be closer and it would be 1,000 times better, but it wouldn't work. Because you would come here and then you'd be like, oh, it's totally different from what was in my head. Of course it is. Right? And if we don't have an appreciation for that and then a way to solve that, what happens is we get flooded with irrelevant stuff, irrelevant information. And we value this irrelevant information very highly. And that's why when John Vervaeke talks about relevance realization, everybody goes, aha, right? Because they know it's right. They just don't understand the concept. I dare say Dr. Vervaeke doesn't either, but that's a different discussion. Right? And they don't understand the concept, even if they understand the significance of it. And a lot of things that are shiny are correct, but so we understand the significance of them. So you could say there's a significance to the term modernity, right? And you could say there's a significance to the end of modernity, and there's a significance to post-modernity, right? It's just bad naming. That's the problem. It's just bad naming. You're misnaming the thing that's significant, and you're misunderstanding the change in it. Because the postmodern problem is older than where they're placing it, right? Which is, roughly speaking, a lack of framing. When you have a lack of framing, what do you have? You have a lack of ability to tell what's relevant or what should be most relevant and what isn't. And that's what we're suffering from. And the internet, of course, just accelerates that because you have access to so much more information. TV doesn't do it any favors. Radio doesn't do it any favors. But the internet just floods everybody with too much stuff. Everyone's talking about podcast fatigue. It's like, well, yeah, of course, because everyone's got an opinion on the old pope, who's going to be the new pope, some war that doesn't affect you at all, right? Or something horrible going on in some town in some country in Europe, which is a continent and not a country, even though we talk about it like a country, right? Some new philosophical theory or like some new physics that solves some problem. And like this, I mean, and there's each one of those, there's 100 different things that are different about them that people are spewing as the right answer. And it's like, there's no relevance realization there. And that's part of the problem. If you don't see it as the age of gnosis, then you're not going to understand why things are the way they are. And then you have to differentiate out the materialism, the objectivism, and the individualism. Now you can start to see what's going on when you think of the world, in those terms. And then it becomes, now you could understand culture and the difference between culture and society, right? The only thing you're missing at that point is the hierarchy and how deep hierarchy is. But once you have those components, you can start to rebuild the hierarchical stuff in the same way that the kids are going to church and using very old ritual techniques to interact and participate in the church without that coming from anywhere seemingly, right? I mean, you can't say it comes from the internet even. You can say they found it on the internet, but they found 1,000 other things on the internet, some of which are older or just as old. Why did they pick that thing? That's the mystery. Well, I don't know. That's really weird, right? And if once you go I don't know, that doesn't actually make any sense why it would be that thing. That's really weird. Now you're back into the miracle. And that's where you need to be, because a whole idea that we can understand these things, or that there's a psychic space dragon mystical force called the internet manipulating people. I mean, that's not happening, right?
Other than just saying, like, they saw a video and then God's grace acted through that. And God's grace is specifically, like, not something that's measurable, not something that we can control or anything like that. It is just the wind blowing where it does, and you don't see where it comes from or where it goes.
Well, but the subtle alteration I would suggest is, of all the videos they saw, God's grace acted through that one, because the real problem is we're not acknowledging the fact that in spite of what happened, there was a lot of other things going on of the same quality, we'll say, or the same apparent quality, and in a greater quantity, and yet you chose this weird one thing, right? Because what everybody does is they say, oh, the video and God's grace comes through the video. That's how the world gets manipulated. And it's like, no, God's grace only comes through that video in spite of all the other videos. Like, not those, right? But it's the not those. It's the overwhelming other that is important nowadays, because we're not thinking in those terms at all anymore. Like, everybody's down to, all the choices I make are between A and B. And it's like, you've never made a choice between A and B ever in your existence, and you never will, because you can't do that. The world is vast. If you decide to have
between A and quadruple Z and everything in between,
right? It's all the missing stuff in the frame, right? Because we're starting from where we are, from our perspective, and looking out, and we're not good at our own perspective. Nobody thinks about how many videos they watched on YouTube and forgot about, by definition, because you forgot about them, right? So why did the ones that you remember get remembered? That's wrapped up in relevance realization, right? And we don't think about these things, but these are the things we need to think about, because that's what re-enchants the world. That's what puts the miracle right back into every single interaction you have, right down to, do I have a pizza or a sandwich for dinner?
Yeah, and it's really subtle and mysterious, the sort of things that move people. You know, when I talk about my vocation story, I always talk about starting off as an altar boy in fourth grade, right? And like the two things, you know, there's all sorts of things that I did in fourth and fifth grade as an altar boy at St. Sifsvins in Stavanger, Norway, right? But like, what are the things that remained with me? One is watching the incense. And like we had the smoker thing going, and I just was captivated by the possibility that someday I'd be the one swinging it around because it looked like fun, you know. But it also, and then like the way that Father Radar stood and carried himself, you know, he just carried himself with like this great dignity and this great seriousness of purpose, while not, you know, being high on his horse or a jerk or anything like that. And it's like, well, you want to know why I'm a priest? Those things aren't irrelevant, right? Like there was a guy putting smoke into the sanctuary and a guy holding himself a certain way, and like that made an effect on me. And now here I am, and I'm trying to do the same thing, although I'm not nearly as serious as he was. So you could take that for, yeah, no. I'm going to be honest. That was his name. He was Norwegian. It was a Norwegian name. And I know you're thinking da 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 da. You know, thinking about MASH there.
Great show.
But here we are.
All right. Right.
You know, so it's like somebody watches a video with Matt Fradd in it, and they couldn't tell you anything that was said in a 2.5-hour conversation, but it made them want to become Catholic. It's like, it's because you had Matt Fradd and a priest being serious men of God, and that made an impact on somebody, you know. Like that's the level we're dealing with here, not the level of, you know, oh, I was convinced by these arguments for these reasons, you know. And every once in a while you might find somebody who's kind of like that, but they're usually the exception and not the rule.
Yeah, they're the exception that proves the rule.
I think he's Australian. Matt Fradd, I think, comes from Australia.
Yeah.
We've stolen him, and you can't have him back.
Oh, no.
I can't. Yeah, every time he talks, I'm in one ear, out the other. I liked listening to him with Pageau, but I only remember the Pageau parts. I really don't remember anything he said.
So what do you usually have? You have a sort of a book reading lessons or talks, or you mentioned on a few occasions that you had some sort of a book review or something.
The Moby Dick Book Club?
Or book club, whatever. Yes. Well, what's that about? I miss out.
Oh, well, you know, Mark seemed to enjoy our book club last summer and fall that we did. And
All right.
actually, I think it lasted all the way through January. Because Moby Dick is a big, thick book right there. But I'm quite convinced that it's probably the greatest piece of American literature.
Just hold on, I'll get my copy. Just hold on, I'll get my copy. All right. Go ahead. I'm listening. All right.
And kind of some of the insights that I sensed, and this latest trip through Moby Dick, especially with some friends around, really helped me, was that Herman Melville was like really tuned into where things were going, and like seeing this stuff from about 1852 that we're still like in the middle of right now, which is a pretty incredible thing to say. And I also just love his prose. I think he's absolutely a hilarious and an entertaining writer. You know, like that the 2 chapters where he's just going on about the different types of whales, I thought was the funniest thing in the world. But there have been many students of American literature who have been bored to tears by that. So
Yeah, but it's the most meaning crisis book that you
I'll
could
get my
possibly
copy,
write.
all right. I'll mute myself and I'll get my copy.
Yeah, it's a very meaning
I'm
crisis.
gonna answer this question here. So usually you don't fast during Eastertide. However, I would say that if you found fasting to be indispensable for disciplining your appetites, and that's a good that you need to attend to, and a great many of us do, then you may need to continue fasting, although I will just note the biblical implications of the Jesus's words, and maybe not putting on a gloomy appearance to it. So usually during Easter time we have a little more festive celebration, although with the exception of Friday of the octave of Easter, all of the Fridays of Easter would ordinarily still be days of penitence, as they had been. So we've got like 1 week of really intense partying, and then, after that, another 40 days of less intense partying. We have about 8 minutes left for rational people.
I like what Sally said there just before what Lux said, by the way. I thought that was nope, 2 up.
This one?
I can't find it.
Yes.
Too many books. So,
Too many books.
all right, yeah, there is. I've got a whole stack of too much there. It's somewhere in there.
That's a lot of books.
In there,
my
so I
gosh.
can't find it.
Oh my gosh.
But that's the most important one there. There you are. That's most important.
Right. There we have it.
Next time. But I've read it a long time ago.
Read it with the book club. You can watch them online.
Yeah, really? All right. I will when I have time, yeah.
They're on the channel. You can just watch watch us go through it.
I certainly will.
And then, I have not forgotten about the Flannery O'Connor book club. We're keeping with the theme of American literature here. That's probably going to start up again this summer, because right now I am up to my eyeballs in all of the everything. So we'll have to let that be when it can be.
That's all right. I've got to do my 12 Rules for Life for Pragmatists book club, and I got to travel first, so we'll see.
What's the other one? Mark Twain. What about Ernest Hemingway? They're the modern American writers. Well, Ernest Hemingway was a bit of a radical.
Hemingway? I don't think I'd read Hemingway. I've read a few sentences.
Bill Stoll.
Yeah, I'm not impressed with his writing.
Civil War on the Republican side, so it speaks volumes.
Yeah, I'm a stickler for, can you form a sentence? Can you write a paragraph? I haven't seen any Hemingway that impressed me.
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain's he's all right. He's all right. He's
his biography of Joan of Arc. His biography of Saint Joan of Arc is magnificent. I can highly recommend it to all people everywhere. And it gives you proof that not only is God, the Father in heaven, an active agent in history, but also that during the end of the 100 Years' War, he sided with the side of the French, which may be rather devastating news to you, but we have to acknowledge as a fact. And there you go. That one right there. Oh, no, Helen Castor. I bet you that's good, too. You'd have to be a real idiot to write a bad story about Joan of Arc. The facts should just speak for themselves.
Yeah, I'm a real stickler for the actual writing, and I care a lot less about the story in a way. I think Hemingway has this, this enchantment around the experience, but I don't think his writing holds up. It's just a lot of authors are like that, right? A lot of people get enchanted by the like George R.R. Martin. Like it's all interesting ideas, but none of them are finished, right? But he like if you pick up one of his books, it's written like a 4-year-old would write. Like I'm not reading this crap. This is utter garbage. Like this guy writes like a child, and he can't tell a story. Right. But there's lots of interesting ideas. And that's the problem, is that people get tied up in interesting ideas and say, you're a good writer. And I'm like, interesting ideas does not make a good writer. Like you got to have a little bit more into it than that. It's actually, Jim, I'd be real interested in your opinion of my book, because there's a lot going on when I write. And so I also have a Substack now too. So I only have my first article on there. But yeah, in my book in particular, it's the writing is a journey. It's not like the writing in the end is not the same as the writing in the beginning, for example. So there's a lot going on. I'd be interested to see how many people pick up on, I mean, it's made explicit in the text. The question is whether or not you caught it before I said it, right? And if you caught it before I said it, then, although maybe if you didn't, it still worked. I don't know how these things work. I'm just good enough a writer to know. You don't know how your stuff works at all. You can't presume at all, right? You just hope that your writing hits the audience that you want to hit with the effect you intend, and that's a miracle.
In our closing minutes, Mark, where can people find this when it comes out?
Yes. Could you put a link? I'd like to.
It's a good question. I have to figure out exactly how that's going to work, because right. I'm preferring the hard copy, although I'm willing to entertain PDFs for people who are absolutely insistent. But I'm probably not going to sell a PDF because this is about community building and participation. And so I really want people to turn the pages, because that's actually a sort of part and parcel. And then all the art's done by the incomparable Sally Jo, who is often in our little live chats here. So it's lovely art, and it's well edited by Castle, who you will know from Moby Dick Book Club, for example. And Bruce helped out quite a bit, and a bunch of other people. So I mean, once I figure all that out, which I just haven't done yet, I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to it with bated breath. I should think that regular participation in the open mics here on my channel would be a good primer for this book.
Exactly.
We would have heard some of this material before, I hope.
There are some familiar themes, I would say, but actually most of the stuff in the book is worked out from older notes from the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server days. And it's more around, because it's navigating wisdom communities. So it's more around communities and somewhat, we'll say, around wisdom. And it is talking indirectly about hierarchy more than directly, we'll say, which is what I do here, or try to, although I talk more explicitly about it here. But a lot of the concepts are like, a lot of the words will be familiar, but there's a bunch of new vocabulary, which shouldn't be new, but it might be in there, especially around the concepts of things like the difference between leadership and authority. Like I go into that in the book because you need to do a good community. So that's more the flavor of the book, is really around how do I build a community, and what are the parts, and what do I do, and how does this work? What's the theory behind this whole thing? And so it's orientation and aim, and all those concepts come up more so than, we'll say, what I talk about here, or even on my channel. And if you want to see a good example of that, like I just did, so my previous live stream on navigating patterns, and then read my Substack, like, because those are the same. They're not identical messages by any means, because I'm talking about two different things, but those are the same themes in two different mediums, but it's the same person communicating them. So you can kind of see the approach that I'm taking. It's also different audiences, which is important. But you get a feel for, oh, this is why the book is so much different than how I would talk about stuff, and particularly on this live stream, because I talk differently on this live stream than I do on mine. So, right, and then that's different from how I talk on my recorded videos, which is kind of all over the place. But none of those styles overlap.
Interesting. Well, we'll look forward to it, just as in the same way as I'm looking forward to bed, because, oh my goodness, it's dark outside, and rational creatures go to bed
night.
under
God
such
bless. Thank you once again.
circumstances. So, good night. God bless you all, and pray for the repose of the soul of Pope Francis, and pray
Yes,
for the
absolutely.
election of the next Roman pontiff. God bless you all.